before we continue,
Yeah.
Sudanta just texted me, and she said that she has connectivity issues. So
Susanna, yeah.
yeah.
I know, I got that.
Santa.
So
Yeah, I see you're back in
yeah.
the chat now, or the Zoom call now.
Yeah.
So.
And actually, and Susanna, was there like I thought you got right to the end of your presentation, but if there's anything you wanted to add, you're more than welcome to. No, of course we might be frozen again. It's yeah, that is the big drawback of the virtual, is that not everyone has the good Wi-Fi on any given day, especially if you're out further from the city. They're working on it at a provincial level, but what can you do? Okay, those are awesome. Thank you very, very much. And yeah. You guys put a lot of work into that, and I think that it's going to bode well for as we continue through this process. I am going to put this slide up. There you go.
Yeah, I think there were certainly some really good insights. I thought that, some real, some points there where it kind of made you think about, where the similarities were, but then, sometimes the focus of those departments is a little bit different. Like when you sort of, I think a couple of you mentioned but tell us, I know beginning about the security, about what their focus may be on, right? Because of the environment they're in. So yeah, there were some good insights there, I think.
Yeah, and what I liked is that each of you really you took a broad view at looking at how they are similar. And as Brittany said in the first presentation, she saw a lot more similarities than there were differences between the attractions in terms of the departments, but then the actual operating requirements in those departments is going to be specialized to the environment in which they're working at. You look at, a lot of you guys did indoor versus outdoor, which I thought was excellent. So a really good juxtaposition. But even when you're thinking about things, when you're talking about HR, or you're talking about, so part of HR is procurement. You've got to get uniforms for the people, right? So suddenly you've got a whole other department or a section of the HR department that's in charge of procurement. Well, if you're at the zoo or you're at the ROM, your procurement needs are going to be completely different, right? Because one is they're both year round and they're both attractions, but at the zoo they're going to need winter gear and rain gear, and they're protective gear if you're doing working with the animals, and steel-toed boots and or rubber boots when you're mucking out the cages. Completely different than the ROM, where you have a bunch of volunteers who are attendants who are used to be they had a tie on and a jacket, and now but a lot of them are wearing nice sweaters or sweater vests and that sort of thing. And security has jackets and uniforms that are completely different than what's happening at the zoo. So I like that you guys pointed that stuff out. So based on everything that you've done and everything that we just heard right here, so what are some of the conclusions that we can draw about the role of operations in attractions? I think we just figured one out here, and that is there are lots of similarities, even though the physical and the themes are different. Do we agree with that? Throw that into the chat, or you can go off mute. Mike, are you okay with that?
I'm okay with that. I kind of built a career on that. So yeah, I mean, when you look at my experience from amusement parks to sporting events to all kinds of different things. Yeah, I've kind of staked my career on the similarities and being able to be transferable from one industry to or I wouldn't say industry, but one theme or one type of attraction to another, right? That once you kind of know the terminology or the language and of that, each group, like the zoo is going to maybe call a whole bunch of things something different than someone like the ROM would, but when you kind of lay it out on paper, the function of that department or those people or that process is similar in a lot of ways, right? They may differ because of the physical environment, but in the end, if you just kind of look at it at a very high level, the objective, of what they're doing is pretty much, it has a lot of similarities. So you're able to, people like me anyway, are able to drop themselves into those environments and, able to sort of figure it out and kind of get in there.
Yeah. Okay. I think you just came up with another one. If you're in operations, the skills that you are learning become very, very transferable. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay. So because they're similar, they're also transferable. And because really a lot of it, and I think that you guys touched on this, operations is about problem solving, but it goes beyond, like at its crux, it's problem solving. But what's so important about operations is thinking about all of the problems that could happen and solving them before they do. I'm not sure if I've said that the right way, but in my mind, that is the basis of operations. It is based on problem solving, I think. Mike?
Yeah, I would say, there's certainly a large element of that, right? In terms of, being able to solve problems or come up with solutions for things as they come your way. And, I'll say a bunch of operations is about sort of, I'll call it best practices, where, there's a lot of shared knowledge within the attractions community. And, one of the best examples of that would be, if you get into water parks, for example, water parks have a really high risk factor attached to them in terms of risk management. And, so they spend a lot of their energy, in some of those departments about sort of obviously managing that risk. So whether it's aquatics or lifeguarding or things like that. And that industry as a whole has developed a really strong association with, and that they, water parks talk to other water parks all the time. And it's a little bit rare in the attractions industry that they have such a close partnership with each other. I've been, a part of many committees or groups where, we're sharing ideas with our competitors, on the phone, saying, this is what we do and this is how we do it. And the idea behind that, or why it was born out of that, is because of that high level of risk, and that the industry itself decided that the whole industry is stronger if everybody's strong, and that that the safety element, that reputationally it hurts everybody. So if there are water parks out there that are sort of getting in the news every day for incidents, or that it's a risk, then it's going to spill over to the entire industry. So there's a lot of that, I'll say, sort of attractions cooperation in work and those things, just to kind of maintain the success. So I don't know if that made a whole lot of sense, or how you can sort of put that down, but it that, yeah, I would say moreover, it's just that, the conclusion there is that, there are, that the attractions industry it's big and it's competitive, but at the same time, there's like a vested sort of interest in making sure everybody succeeds. So,
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So, and those best practices, because those associations and groups that form up, they tend to spill over from one to another. I mean, you look at, they have the IAPA, which I think we mentioned before, the International Association of Parks and Attractions, which is a very large organization for operators of all kinds of things. And they include museums and zoos and amusement parks and all that, and they share a learning, like it's mostly a convention, let's say, that they started with, right? That you could go to a trade show and find new product, and vendors that sell to that industry could be there. But then it grew into something much bigger, where it's that association is really built on learning and development of professionals in the industry. So they they offer courses and training, and you learn from your peers. But what happens is that sort of shared knowledge in the industry gets spread. And that's where I think where you see some of these similarities too, that they're born out of this sort of, this shared collective knowledge that comes through there. The zoos have the, AZA and all those other things that, help them sort of develop this, practices and sort of maintain, and it pushes everybody to be better.
Okay, thanks, Talis. Have a great day. We'll see you soon. She's got to log off, unfortunately, but she promised to watch the recording. We'll tell a couple of jokes, Talis, at some point, hopefully get you to laugh.
There's going to be a code word that we have to say, at some point in time. It's going to be slipped in there, and then we're going to ask her next week what the code word was.
That's awesome. All right. Okay, so what do we got here? Oh, I messed something up. There we go. Individuals can modify shared knowledge to improve their own services. And pardon me?
I always told people that you're doing things right when other places start copying you.
Well, that's right. That's right. And when we look at I went from Ontario Place to the ROM, and I took the knowledge that I gained from Ontario Place in terms of how to make the experience of entry for groups to be better. Right. So Mike and I figured that out at Ontario Place, and we did a really good job with it. And I took that knowledge and I moved it over to the ROM, who they don't have the same type of group. So at Ontario Place, on any given day, especially in the spring, we could have 2,000-3,000 people coming in, kids coming in from schools. And we had a whole process in place that we had to figure out to make it run as smoothly as we could, to make the experience awesome. So when I went over to the ROM, I took a look at how they were doing it, and they weren't putting through thousands. They were putting through, a couple of hundred kids a day, different age groups too, for different programs and different things. And I took a look at the, the way it had been done. I took a look at the opportunities that we could utilize in separate entrances, taking into consideration, you guys have pointed out several times about the difference at security at the ROM versus some other places. And you're absolutely right. Security is key, because some of the stuff is worth millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars. So there's, taking into account, how do we get people in, make sure that everyone gets in safely, make sure that their stuff is stowed, because at Ontario Place everyone carried everything around, but at the ROM you weren't allowed to carry stuff around. So all these people coming in with their backpacks, we had to figure out how we're going to make all that happen. And we made changes to it to make it work better for the consumer. At the end of the day, it was a better experience. But this does bring me to the next thing that I think that we've talked about several times is no department works in a bubble in the successful operations of an attraction. For us to make changes at Ontario Place or make changes at the ROM, and when I went to the museum to make changes there, sorry, there's another museum in Kitchener I worked at for a while. It's a community effort, really. So at the ROM, you're dealing with the admissions and guest services staff. You have to make this plan, and they have to have their say, and they have to say, okay, Chuck, you haven't thought about this. It's like, oh, you're right. I had no idea. I'm looking at it from a numbers perspective and from a service perspective. I had not looked at it from a security perspective. So we had security involved. I hadn't looked at it from the admissions perspective of how they had done things in the past and how we could modify things. I hadn't looked at it from the education perspective, because there were often different schools coming in for different things, including classes. So they'd actually be going into a classroom setting for a lesson before they were off into the museum, but there was other people that weren't, and there was lunchrooms and all sorts of different coordinating things that had to take place. You had to talk with the maintenance and service staff to make sure that they knew and they were okay with a staggered approach to lunches, which meant that instead of having everyone in the area for an hour and a half and they only had to schedule for that hour and a half, now you're going to have to schedule someone for 3 or 4 hours because people were staggering in and out. And I learned my lesson at Ontario Place a couple of times where I would just do it and then try to, Mike would say Chuck happens and swear at me a lot and say, what the heck were you thinking? And when I went to the ROM, I did a better job of coordinating and trying to, so I would talk first with the management teams of all we'd go into the senior management teams and I'd say, this is what we want to do. Who wants to be involved in making it happen? And making sure that all of the different departments were in it.
I'd like to think that the ROM probably owes me something for,
Oh, absolutely.
You into that guy.
Maybe a nice dinner up at the restaurant or something.
That's right.
Okay. So how do we write that down? What do we say here, Mike? Or anyone, because you guys, hopefully everyone else on the call, feel free to type stuff in here. It's better than listening to us drone on and on and on. Oh, there's Naf. Go ahead.
Yeah, that no one department can work on their own, and that there should be some kind of cooperation between all departments if we want the operation to run smoothly and efficiently.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think sometimes the cooperation, when we talk about that sort of interdependence between all these departments in a park, when you take an attraction, some of them are so large that, those interactions between you and the other departments may be, they may be not quite as direct as like, where you're sitting down and talking with them every day. So, we're going to, we may sort of touch on, how do you sort of communicate or at least, get them involved in, something like Canada's Wonderland, for example, which is massive in terms of its operation. Yes, they have to have their sort of weekly coordination meetings. So, heads from every department are, there every week and they run through the week that's coming up. And then sometimes when there's things that are going to happen in the future that are bigger discussions, then you can break off and say, okay, well, let's table a discussion for these kinds of things. But then on the day-to-day operation, there is a shared accountability throughout the park. And some of that, it just means that you expect everybody to do their thing. So, if you're in ride operations, for example, then you depend on rides maintenance to set up and make sure that those rides are ready to run every day. There isn't a direct communication every day to make sure that, hey, we open at 10, you can have all these things going. It's just understood. So, some of those things, some departments count on other departments to do their job first before someone else can act. So there's a lot of that sort of, this sort of teamwork aspect that goes out, but you're accountable to not only the people coming to the park, but to the departments that you serve. Like, for example, a human resources department, they don't have a lot of guest interaction, but they certainly have a lot of interaction with every department in the park. And they may be responsible for all kinds of things like, getting staff their uniforms or doing those kinds of things. And all those things have to happen in order for other people's plans to succeed. And usually that means that, those departments that are kind of counting on that, they don't need that sort of direct, like, hey, you're going to make sure everybody has a uniform, right? That it just has to happen, right? So you expect it. In my experience in those bigger parks, it's where the bigger sort of hurdles come operationally is when, a department kind of moves on their own and doesn't sort of speak to what their plans are, so that other people aren't, light bulbs aren't going on all over the place saying, how does that affect me? Or how does this affect what we do as a process because we support you, or that, or that we have some other role in the park.
That's a good word to add in there, communication. And then the reason I put this is true regardless of the size of attraction is there needs to be, so I'm just going to throw out a real life scenario that's happening right now at Glow Zone. So there is, the new vaccinate, showing proof of vaccination is out there now. It's out there for restaurants. It's out there for hotels and conference centers. We as Glow Zone are technically exempt from having to do it at the moment, based on the way that we're interpreting and our, the Tourism Industry Association of Ontario and Attractions Ontario are interpreting the rules. However, we do have party rooms and we serve pizza. So in that part of our business, we would be considered food handling or a restaurant. So for that part of the business, I think that we're supposed to have the vaccination, proof of vaccination, which, now suddenly, so we sat down as the four owners and we started to think through at a high level, how are we going to handle this? Part of me, and once again, I am, attractions to me, this whole industry is about money. This is an economic driver. Part of me thinks, and the selfish part of me thinks, that if we just stuck to the letter of the law and we did not do vaccination, proof of vaccination, because just from the sheer amount of calls that our staff have been getting and we've been getting about, do you have to show the vaccination? No, not at the moment. Great. And they would come in. Everyone's wearing a mask. Everyone's doing all the safety protocols are all in place, but we didn't have to show proof of vaccination. I think there are so many places nowadays that are going the route of double vax. I was thinking, boy, we could actually see a boost in our business, because we'd be the only ones that the people who have not gotten vaccinated can come. And, and that's 20% of Ontarians at the moment. There's a lot of people in Ontario, so there's a good argument to be had there. The flip side to that is there's 80% who are double vaccinated. Are they not going to come because, there are people who are not double vaxxed? There's, out of that 20% that are not vaccinated, I would think that it's only a few percent that have made that choice because of a political reason, right? Versus a personal reason. If there's a personal reason why you're not getting vaccinated, it's very different than trying to take a political stand on not getting vaccinated. But those are the loudmouths and giving everyone else who's not vaccinated the bad, that bad rap. But then so we had to make an operations decision, and what we've decided to do is do proof of showing that you're double vaccinated. And now comes the issue of how are we going to operationalize that as a small business? How is that going to work? And that's when we started to pull in our part-time staff and started to, the team leads. What problems do you think are going to happen? What are your concerns? How are we going to make this work? And it's only each one's only about 15,000 square feet. So the way things work is people come through the front door, they walk up to the desk, they pay for their mini golf or laser tag or an arcade cards or whatever, and they go on their way. Or if they're coming to a birthday party, you've got the birthday parents are coming in and we bring them into their party room, they set it up, and then other parents are coming and dropping off their kids. So one of the staff right away said, what happens if the parent is just dropping off their kid and they're not staying, and the kid's under 12 and you don't need the proof of vaccination, and but the parent is not vaccinated either? Does that mean that the parent is going to have to leave their child at the door and not get to come into the building, which could pose an issue? Because if you're bringing a 7-year-old or a 6-year-old to a party at a place you've never been to before, I don't think you're going to feel comfortable, and this is what the staff said, and very smartly, I don't think they're going to feel comfortable just leaving their kid to wander in. So we looked at some of the situations that they're talking about at restaurants where people are not vaccinated and are sitting outside on the patios, but they are allowed to go in to use the washroom. They're allowed to go in to use to go and pay if the machines they don't have the range to reach out onto the patios. They can have 15 minutes inside the building and not be vaccinated. And because of that, because we'd seen that, and this staff member brought this up as a potential issue, we're able to now, we haven't even implemented it yet, like the vaccination, because we haven't worked through all the operating logistics, but that's one that we've worked through, so that we'll be able to let all the party parents know that the other parents coming into the party can drop their kids off and right at the party room before leaving. Everyone's masked up, because at that point everyone is masked up. It's only when they're having the pizza that they're not going to be masked up. So let's go into the chat. What other things do you think I need to think about as a business in terms of how do I successfully operationalize this big policy change, and what processes do we need to put into place? Even in the chat, or you can you can just go off mute if you want, because actually I'm asking because I'm curious to see what I've missed, because there's always something, right? It's right.
Yeah.
It's true. There's always another good idea.
I don't have any good ideas for you, Chuck, but I will say, as a comment, I think, the pandemic is a good, it's a good example, I think, of how, sometimes, you have to really change the way you look at, an industry in terms of how you operate. And, it caused everybody to move very quickly and, in ways they didn't expect. I'd say at the beginning, I remember making plans for Wet and Wild in terms of, what that sort of post reopening sort of operational state would look like. And a lot of those things, made me kind of want to, scratch my head or, sort of look and go, oh gosh, because, before, a lot of our operational plans were built on maximizing throughput or, being the most efficient at doing, whatever it is that we were trying to do, because we wanted to either minimize the disruption or the inconvenience to the person, at the attraction, the guest or the member or whatever. And, and we wanted to sort of maximize the ability for the attraction to generate revenue off of, its activities. the pandemic has sort of thrown a wrench in all that stuff, because the plans that you create now they're based on adapting to rules that have been sort of given to you by people who don't necessarily understand or live in your world. Their focus is on public health. So they're like, I don't really care about your issues, that we're going to do that. And I'm not saying that that's the wrong approach for public health. That's what they needed to do. But from an operations standpoint, it was a really big change to start developing or doing things that were sort of contrary to what you'd have been doing the whole time. That, now all of a sudden you're adding in these extra layers and processes that are going to definitely slow you down, or they're definitely going to reduce your ability to, to move people through. And in Chuck's example with the birthday parties, it certainly makes the experience more complicated for those people attending, because before it was a fairly straightforward process, right? That we're going to host this party, it's going to be in this spot, kids are going to be dropped off. There wasn't all these other considerations lumped in. And in a perfect world, in a vacuum, you wouldn't want to add all those things, because that's what you're dealing with. But that it's created, by necessity and sometimes by regulation, that you've had to sort of look at that and backtrack away from, some of those other things where, you would have sort of obviously, you would never have sort of operationalized yourself in the way that you are right now, because it just it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense on paper, in sort of the pre-COVID era, I guess, or I guess I don't know how we'll talk about it one day, like the pre-COVID, post-COVID lives that we lead now, right? Yeah. But
the new normal.
Yeah, the new normal, or approaching normal, or whatever we think it's going to be, right? But yeah, that's the realities of your operation, Chuck, have changed significantly, and they may not ever go back.
Exactly. Naf?
Yeah, I do have a comment. It's not like I'm not working, so I don't know really like how people are handling it, like the vaccination policies thing. But I just want to share the experience of my son in the university, and I don't know if that would benefit anyone. Like, for the time being, the UFT is accepting people to enter the campus with one vaccine only. If providing like a test saying that for 3 days that you don't have COVID, like PCR I'm talking about. And they actually provided even the kits for the PCR. Now, what I'm saying, so we're doing the PCR at home. My idea is, if we are like eventually and in a transitional stage into being fully vaccinated, all of the people of Ontario, if the university is allowed to do the one vaccine policy thing, why shouldn't other indoor areas?
Yeah, I think I at the university, I don't know the answer to that, unfortunately, because I've got my son's at first year at Guelph. Oh, he picked up his first $150 open alcohol ticket on the weekend too. Stupid kid. Anyway,
well done.
Yeah, I know, that's my boy. That's besides the point. Anyway. I think I think the single vax is only for it's got an expiration date based on 6 weeks or 8 weeks forward, whenever people are expected to get their second shot. That's what I thought.
Yeah, I think I think what you highlight there, Naf, is that the difficulty right now in operating anything, and attractions are no different, is that we're in sort of this phase of things right now where the rules, and it's been going on for a while now, that the rules have changed quite a bit, and they will continue to evolve, right, as they sort of policymakers come up with what they believe is the best case forward. And I think always there's I'll say there's a saw off between doing things that there's sort of absolute that everything applies to everything, or that they're being selective about industry. And some of it, obviously has political bent to it. Some of it's just about, what they sort of deem as essential or non-essential and all that kind of stuff. But, as someone who's dealing with this on the front lines every day, that, it has been a challenge as an operator to deal with that, because you need to you need to react to these realities as they come up. And I think, that will probably be with our industry for the foreseeable future, that, hopefully as we move forward, that things relax and that we can get closer and closer back to what we sort of did in the past. But that's probably still a ways out. And, it's the biggest challenge has been the unpredictability of the whole thing, that, all of us can sit and think, okay, remember back, at the beginning when the rules were this, and then we opened some things up and the rules were this, and then we closed and then we opened up again and we had some new rules to deal with. And the vaccine mandate is just another new rule that everybody needs to sort of to deal with. And all of those things, somehow you have to bake back into whatever plan you had. And, those mandates affect like Chuck's operation, where he has different things going on within the glow zone that they apply differently. And so then it's like, okay, well, how do we create a plan for this entire operation that we're following all these rules and mandates that we have, but we're doing it in a way that makes the most sense for the business and for our ability to sort of service our customers, because in the end, that's what we're still trying to do is to create those experiences, right? And that, although there's those added levels of sort of, control that have been put in front of it because of the public health, issues that are going on right now, that, once you've kind of gone through all those things, that the core of the glow zone is still the same, that it's, you're going to have your pizza party, you're going to have some mini golf, you're going to play some arcade games, you can get some laser tag in, and all that kind of stuff happens. But we got to kind of to clear all those formalities first, or maybe there's modifications to those elements. And, you can look at every single attraction in the province and see how they've had to really develop those plans. And that those plans are still evolving, that those facilities will sort of tweak them, move them around, and some of that's just by learning the hard way, right? Some of those, like, we opened with this is how we were going to do it. And then we did it and it was difficult, or it was cumbersome, or the guests were really reacting negatively to it. So we had to sort of redevelop or relook at those plans and move forward on it. And I'd say sometimes it's forced people to do things that are contrary, as in terms of what they would normally do in operations, because of, our previous goals, or our previous, bent would be about, moving fast, getting people in, doing all that kind of stuff. We had to change, how we looked at it. I deal with the vaccine mandate every day now. And, for the most part.
I was gonna say, how many times have you called the cops? Just once?
Only once. Yeah, I was an Instagram celebrity for a little bit, but the video got pulled down, unfortunately. So y'all missed it. But yeah, this is the reality we're in right now. And I think, if you guys sort of, as you break out into, hopefully careers in the, in the tourism sector and in the industry, you will, this indelibly will be, COVID will be something that sort of lives with us for quite a long time. And it's a real example of how everybody had to shift, and, how those interplays sort of played out, that, how did, if you took Canada's Wonderland, and how did they react to their reopening? Obviously, it changed their whole procedures. Their admissions department has, changed radically, right? You don't just buy tickets anymore. You got to reserve your slot and your time. And, the security department and the people checking your bags at the front have new requirements built in. And, and they have indoor restaurants where they check vaccines now and all those things. So that's stuff that they didn't have to do before. And they really had to, find a way to take their existing systems, because you can't just throw the whole thing out. And but they had to find a way to make all that work. And some of it was, the ticketing systems, obviously, that was a lot of back end development. And, that would have been working with their vendors and their partners and all that, and saying, here's what we need. And, how fast can you develop it? And then, sort of roll out and do all those changes. So, yeah, I mean, in a few years ago from now, people will be kind of looking at all this stuff and really, learning lots of lessons, and they may make the industry stronger, or be able to react quicker to different things. And I think we've found some, some things, like especially when you talk about those virtual programs at some of these attractions, that they may stay forever because they were really successful for them, or they really launched their brand, and they wouldn't have never done it if it wasn't, for the pandemic era.
But they got to figure out how to make money off of. That's what drives me
Exactly.
nuts. Stop giving it away for free. No, and I one of the issues, and you touched on it, Mike, is things are changing rapidly and continue to evolve, continue to put a lot more onus on both the operators, like the business owners and the staff, as well as the consumer. And it's the new processes and stuff are typically slowing things down at a time when the consumer patience is at an all-time low, which is causing a lot more tension and leads to weird interactions with people who are just at their wits' end. But then it's also, you got to look from an operations standpoint. Suddenly there's another layer of concern for your staff, because now you have to worry about their mental health, right? Now they're instead of all they're there to make sure everyone's having a great time. And boy, if you've got the right personality for that, you can make that happen. It's awesome. And now you're mitigating people's, the consumers' worries and their fear and their anger and all of these sort of things, which is to try to get them to have a good time. And it just is adding in another layer of, of things that as business operators you need to worry about. So just going back to GlowZone in terms of our, what we want to do. So things that we will do once we finalize the plan, but we will make sure it's all over the website, all over, our social media. So we will communicate the expectations to the consumer, so that very few people will show up not knowing what to expect. And then that is very important. If you go on our Facebook page, when we reopened last year for those couple weeks in 2019, or 2020 summer, we actually posted took a video of what the experience was going to look like, in the age of COVID. So we had staff having their masks on, going in as customers, washing their hands and getting the putters, and then the putters, when they came out, how they're washed, how everything is sanitized. It was to show that you can still have a good time in a safe environment. This is pre-vaccine, and it worked for us. We didn't have a ton of people in 2020, but we had more people than a lot of others because we were able to show what that experience was going to be like. We'll have signs on the door. We'll have the staff trained on what to say in every situation that we can think of, going back on the proactive. Every scenario we can think of, we will have a response for it for the staff to be able to say, because the owners aren't always there, right? So sometimes there's a 17 or 18-year-old who's in charge of the building. So they have to be prepared to be able to, deal with someone who wants to argue with them, and be firm and do their part. And we also need to be reactive. So we have weekly meetings with the team leads. We have a WhatsApp group where, as situations are happening or just happened, this just happened, here's how I dealt with it, what are some suggestions, and the team then shares ideas, so that if it ever happens again, then they can, they know how to react to that situation, because it's already happened somewhere. So the communication is key. But I think what we've been hinting around so going off of that, just how that all relates to operations, and I think this is what we're going to get into in the next couple of lessons. What we're hinting around is that at its operations is about setting some policies, right, across all departments, setting a policy about uniforms, or a policy about ride maintenance, a policy about safety and security. You name it, there's policies in place. and then you are building processes to make to hit that policy. If that, Mike, did I say that right? How would you describe that?
It's about controlling the chaos.
Yeah, fair enough.
But yeah, I think, you know, you get that, yes, that, you know, the operations, you know, you have that sort of split thing where you're building policies, plans, and you're creating a plan to sort of execute this thing. And then, you know, within that plan, though, you have to sort of have these sort of moments of, you know, that you're going to deal with the unexpected, right? And the things that you can't predict or that are going to come your way. And that's about having, you know, when you develop these plans, that they're robust enough that they have, you know, that they have the ability to be, you know, to be flexible and still work. That they're not completely rigid, you know, in a lot of cases, because the world isn't, as we can see right now, it's not as clean and it's not as cut and dry as what you're, you know, is sort of, you know, what you would want it to be as a, you know, if you just sat there in sort of a, you know, in the distance and sort of planned out theoretically, you're never going to be able to plan for every single thing that goes down there. But
yeah, so this, because everything we've been talking about, so our new policy is going to be, we're going to require people to have show proof of their 2 vaccinations. I had hoped to hold off until the little app came in, but we want to launch this prior to Thanksgiving, just because that's, you know, that we same thing, picked a date, off you went. And I think that the one thing we're trying to work our heads around is, you know, can we as GlowZone, can we have, because we aren't required to have it for people who are just coming in to do the mini golf, laser tag, and arcade with no food, you know, should part of our policy be, if they're coming in to do that, they can also show the negative PCR test, as Naf was saying, if they're doing at the universities, so that those who have chosen not to get vaccinated, not for, you know, can still come in and enjoy it, understanding that we want to make sure that the environment is as safe as humanly possible for you know, for everyone who is there. So, but once that becomes the policy, we'll communicate that out to the staff, and then we'll also, you know, give them speaking points for when they are questioned on the phone, when they're questioned in person. Someone sees the big sign and still walks in because the sign doesn't apply to them for some reason, and there's people that are going to be like that. How do they deal with these different situations? And you arm your staff with as much information and as much forethought as you can, so that it still becomes a smooth a process as possible to make it all happen. So, you know, it's that. So that was really, that whole thing was talking about, regardless of the size of attraction, we all go through it. We just go through it in different ways. There's not 6 department heads who are planning, like at a Wonderland, 6 to 10 department heads who are figuring out how they're going to implement these new policies and these new restrictions to make an overall experience for the guests excellent, because there's not 10 departments at GlowZone. We're still making the same decisions, but in our little micro bubble. And that's, you know, going right back to what Brittany said at the very beginning, there's a lot more similarities than there are differences. It just has to do with scale and how it's implemented, but it's all for the same purpose. It's all to ensure an amazing and safe guest experience, so that you keep having people come back, so that everyone stays employed, you continue to grow, and everyone is happy. That's, you know, including the staff and the owners, and of course the people that are coming.
Yeah.
What
I
other
think scale,
Yeah.
when you look at scale, I think the one thing that to take away it is that, you know, that those decisions, like you said, they happen at, you know, at either type of facility. It's the I will say the speed of those decisions can be altered by the size of the facility. If the buck stops with Chuck at Glow Zone and he has all of the sort of decision making, ability, then it falls on him to sort of say, yes, that's what we're going to do. So you can react faster. But in a bigger facility, obviously you can't do that. There's a lot more players involved. I'd say the advantage when you're in these sort of bigger settings with larger things is that you have more people looking at it. So they will find potential problems that one person couldn't find or that didn't anticipate. And so the plan may be a little bit more, I'll say, thorough. I wouldn't say thorough, but just in terms of complexity, it may have more parts to it only because more people have sort of chimed in on it. And so they may have more things covered out than a sort of smaller attraction where you're going to make those decisions and then there's going to be some learning moments through that, or because you just can't anticipate all the things that are going on. One thing that I did, I'll say anecdotally, the sort of in terms of changing policies and procedures, and where it actually kind of paid off a little bit, as I was speaking to an operator from the summer about their experience with the summer and limited capacity and doing all those kinds of things. Because obviously, I mean, the logic would tell you that you want to do as many people as possible, because that's where you're going to make your money. Obviously, they were restricted in the number of people that they could have in the attraction. And where they found, though, was that it wasn't as big of a hit to the bottom line as they thought, because one of the things that did go up is there's something called per cap spend that we deal with in the sort of financial world in the parks, where it's a metric of basically how much people spend. When you take your total revenue for the day and divide it by the number of people in there, that's how much money per person that you got from that attraction. And then it gets broken between admissions per cap and in-park spend, because admissions is kind of a fixed bit. So you can say, okay, and that, why you have a per cap in admissions is because you could sell tickets at different rates if there's discounts and things like that. So you kind of want to be in a certain area. But the in-park one is really important because that drives a lot of revenues in terms of food and beverage or retail and all those different things. And they found that their in-park spend went up significantly this year because of, a number of factors. And one of it was because they were fewer people in the park, which meant that the lines at the various kiosks, windows, and all that stuff were smaller, which drove people to feel that it was less of a hassle to get those products. So whereas you would make a decision and say, I'm not going to line up here because I don't want to wait this long for this thing, or it's not worth it to me. All of a sudden, when that wait is significantly smaller, you may change your mind about it. And the other factor,
funnel cake for everybody.
Exactly. And the other thing that they think played into it too was that there was a lot of pent up demand in terms of people had been locked in for 18 months or whatever it was, and it's kind of like you're like on shore leave. You just like you get this moment of like, I'm going to try to embrace that sort of quote unquote normal life. So I'm going to try to experience all of it and all the things I missed. But that's one thing they didn't anticipate, was that their per cap spend was going to go up by it almost like doubled on some days. And that was obviously that helped them, and it was something that wasn't anticipated, but it was a knock-on effect of all the other things that they had done. So it may be interesting to see if some attractions gravitate more towards the sort of exclusive limited attendance, as opposed to the previous notion of having more people is better, because now you have this experience out of the pandemic where people are like, it's kind of cool to be like to make it feel a little more VIP and a little bit less sort of crowded, and sort of move around like that.
No, I agree. And yeah, and obviously, yeah, it's more enjoyable when there's less people.
Exactly. Yeah. We had that discussion years ago when I was at Canada's Wonderland. There's sort of two prevailing thoughts on that, right? Where it was like, let's make the admission price attractive so that we can do 4 million people a year, or what if we just brought up the admission price a little bit higher, we did, 2.3 million people, but, could we do the same revenue on it? And then, what are your metrics in terms of, like Naf said, is the experience more enjoyable? Like, are you getting fewer complaints? Are people liking it more? And is the demand going up because people are having a better time? And then all of a sudden you're making it more exclusive. And then so you can say, well, okay, well, there's always this, what's the limit on what we can charge before we start really losing people on this? We're going to obviously lose people every time we go up, but are we losing just enough that we can maintain, or that we're kind of like,
well,
okay,
and then there's less wear and tear on the equipment. There's a whole ton of other things that are cost savings against the additional cost or admission rates. Naf?
Yeah, I would just add something. Like, if I were in this position, I would start by a pilot study. Let's say pilot where there will be days for members only, or something like days for special packages. During these days, and I will be monitoring. If I still have the same, let's say, revenue, then I would start to increase the usage of these days. And this will be like a step after step, towards the same end, rather than taking the decision abruptly and then end up like regretting that.
No, it's a good point. I've added in research into point 3 there based on that now, because you're right. You need to do some research. Although sometimes trial and error works. Mike, do you talk about Wet and Wild, what you did with the cabanas? You just kept putting the price. Did you just kept putting the price up until there was 2 left, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's basically what happened. I think it's a real notion of like, it's one of those limited supply, and in creating demand, allowed us to sort of to push the envelope on that price, right? And saying, okay, well, we're not going to have 1 million cabanas. We're going to only have a few. And the cabanas, if you don't know they're like that sort of exclusive, like you have your own sort of shade tent thing, and you have your own furniture, and you have a server that comes to you. So from a water park standpoint, water parks all over the place in like the last, I would say 10 years ago, they almost didn't exist, these cabanas. And all of a sudden, and all that's where I talk about like parks sharing things, is like a park somewhere decided, let's try this. And all of a sudden they're like, wow, we can make money off this. And then other people are like, well, tell me about your program. But yeah, it was, you create this scarcity, you create a demand, and you create something that is, that feels like a VIP experience, because it is, I guess, in a way. And there's always somebody who will do it. It may not be everybody, and that's fine, because everything in your facility doesn't have to cater to everybody who's coming. I mean, you have to, obviously, at the bigger part of it, the entire park is sort of accessible to everybody, or the rides and attractions, but those upsells or those upcharged things. Yeah. So, I mean, with the cabanas, it was a lot of trial and error about, okay, well, what price point can we realistically get to here before, we start seeing that, because we don't want to have empty ones, especially, if you're, it's a Saturday and it's, 32 degrees outside and it's sunny, then the place is going to be busy. So you want to sell all those. So what's that number at? And yeah, we kept ratcheting that up, and we didn't really find an upper level to it. It's, I guess at some point it just, you're more worried about what your conscience is thinking than whether, but those are certainly, and Disney does that too. I mean, if you look at Disney and you start asking them, if you told them you wanted to do a certain experience, and they would just tell you how much it would cost. And some people would be like, oh, I'm not doing that. But there's always someone else who's like, that sounds like a good deal. Or and there is no upper limit for what they will provide in terms of, it just depends on how much you're willing to pay.
Well, and talking about the shared best practices, the front of the line thing. So Disney parks did that, knowing that to make a better experience, it was offered free. You could go ride to ride, and you would get your time to go on the ride, so you didn't have to spend your whole day waiting in line. And I'm not sure if they were the first ones to do it, but they probably were. But then other parks started to do the same thing, but also saw the opportunity to make some money doing it. So Wonderland, now you spend what, $50, $60 to get into the park. and then you can spend another $100 to avoid the lineups. And they only sell like a couple thousand of those a day. And now you can get to the front of the line, which then makes the line even longer for the other people that are waiting, and it becomes, you know, the same thing. They probably said they could put it up higher because they do sell out most days, but then at some point you gotta, you know, balance out
now they have like two tiers of that, right, where they have the like fast pass and then the fast pass plus, so
which allows the biggest rides,
better rides. Yeah.
That's right.
But that operationally, yeah, I mean, there's two components of that, like this development of that program and what it's going to cost and all those kinds of things, and what's a realistic, you know, cap on the number of people that, because if you give everybody that access, then it stops being a perk, right? Yeah. But then from their, just like the way those attractions were laid out, some of the attractions that were sort of at the park beforehand were never built with this program in mind. And you know, if you go there now, you can see how they had to sort of build new queue areas or build, you know, lineups that go around the lines. And now the newer stuff has that already baked in because that it was part of the plan. So you can, you know, look at those different examples of how they had to operationalize. That would have been a perfect like study of how somebody in the revenue department, you know, was sitting there going, this is a great way for us to make a lot of money. And the GM's probably like, it absolutely is. So we need to do it. And then someone in the ride operations department is like, how in the world am I going to pull this off with all these rides that were never intended for this front of the line access? Because when, you know, previously, you know, when they were built, nobody even thought that that was something that a park would do. So that would have been a lot of work for that operations team, right, to figure out how to make all those things pay off. And now it's just kind of part of the park, right? Like everybody knows that it's a thing that, and yeah, they're not alone in doing it, but yeah, that would have been a big operational challenge for them to pull off at the beginning. But for the park, it would have been very worthwhile. And it's certainly a large revenue driver for them.
Yeah. Okay, so what I'm going to suggest is, because and thank you so much for sticking with us for this part. Let's take a 10-minute break. Come back at 10. And while you're on break, just think about if you have anything else that you know in these first 3 weeks and now today, that sort of your any conclusions, any aha moments that you've had, and you can write them in the chat or talk to them and add a couple more things to here. We have a really cool, I think it's cool, a really fun scenario that I'd like to sort of, that pulls everything together. And we've talked about some other scenarios here today. And then we'll get out of here. We might be out of here a bit early, unless we get on a roll, which we seem to do. And you guys, you know, seem to stick with us, which we really appreciate. So. All right. Keep learning new things every day, Michael. All right. If you guys are back, you can just let me know in. Oh, Knopf's back. Brittany, Susantha, hopefully. Give it another minute. I am a minute early here. Oh, thank you. Perfect. All right. So, what else have you? What are your other thoughts? About what you've learned so far when it comes to attractions and having them be successful? As you're typing that in, Mike, you got anything else we should be adding in as these guys are typing things?
I think, you know, based on, you know, where we looked at these different attractions and their similarities and all that kind of in those presentations, I think one of the, you know, the big themes that sort of came out of that is, you know, that, how can I say that, you know, that they sort of all cater to their own theme, right? And so that directs their it directs how they sort of develop their own policies or whatever. So whatever niche they're they're sort of forming in that in the industry. It sort of guides, you know, how they kind of use that. If you want to say that there's sort of that sort of, you know, toolkit of, you know, departments slash, you know, that how to operate an attraction, you know, manual, that it's sort of taken and spun for its own setting. So, you know, like I said, a museum operator may have, you know, it may sort of take those sort of premises or those thoughts and run them in a certain way, whereas the Toronto Zoo has, you know, very different way of sort of operationalizing those same criteria because of the niche that they fill.
Okay. Makes sense. So did I write that down properly? Like, is that how you'd write it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. And before we move on, anyone else with any other last minute comments? Either we're doing a great job or we've I think we've covered a lot. I think we've done I think we've got a good thing going here. Okay, so now we're gonna our next sort of section is really gonna start to dive into interdepartmental coordinate or cooperation. So we did say that no department can work on their own or operate in a silo, and that cooperation, coordination, communication is required for overall success. And we're really going to dive into that a little bit more in this next section. So, you know, based on those presentations today, I believe you understand the amount of variables that mold the operating requirements of an attraction. You understand the various departments and systems that are involved in the success of the operations of an attraction. So now let's start to get into the complexity of that interconnection. So I've just put in the Padlet into the post. Let me stop sharing this one and then share the Padlet screen if I can figure that out. There we go. So you should be seeing the Padlet screen up there. So here's our scenario. So in an effort to boost midweek sales, Canada's Wonderland senior management decides to stay open till 11 p.m. every Wednesday in June and end the night with a 15-minute fireworks display. So part one, what departments need to be part of the decision-making process? So let's just start with that. So log on in and just start typing your thoughts, and I'm going to spread these all around. Yep. So we got safety. Good marketing. Missions. What do you? They don't do it, Mike. They should do it. We should suggest that to them. Staying open to 11 most nights instead of. That's a good one. Finance, yeah.
Oh, I'm sure they've thought of whether it made sense for them to do it.
Yeah. Well, they used to do it on Canada Day, and would cause accidents on the 400.
Yeah, because people stop and watch fireworks from the shoulder of the highway.
Yeah. Okay. There's I'm sure there's lots more here. Let's go through what we've got, and then we'll keep typing away as you think of other stuff. So when you're talking safety, are we talking the safety security people, Naf? Like the security team too? Oh, she's on mute.
Yeah,
Yeah,
all the procedures, not only like the security part. I mean, all the safety. I mean, are the fireworks installed correctly? Other than the let's say the operation of the Wonderland itself. I mean, there should be some people who is making sure that everything is in place and everything is done correctly and abiding by the government protocols. Now, I mentioned the government protocols because the time, like 11 p.m., get like people and especially dog owners really disturbed. So, so you need to arrange like in the community. I mean, you need to communicate that in a way.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you need to have your permits and all sorts of stuff. I agree.
You can imagine that the neighbors of the park, would want to get a heads up that someone's going to be blasting off fireworks on a Wednesday at 11 o'clock at night.
Right.
So, like when we were at Ontario Place, we did all those fireworks shows, and one of the considerations there was our proximity to the island airport. So we had to have communication with the airport about when our show was going to launch, where it was launching from, so that they could look at the incoming flights and put a notice out to the pilots that there's going to be, this in the area. And there was a lot of coordination involved in that because, but yeah, you're right. There's the safety considerations. Canada's Wonderland, they would have we'd bring in Vaughan Fire to be around the launch area because the park is so congested. There isn't like this giant field anymore where you can just go launch it out, right? So they're launching it from basically the back of the water park, and they would spray down the rooftops of all the buildings in there and make sure everything's wet so that if you have an ember land, it doesn't burn down pizza as part of the show. So
it's a good it's having everyone on board, especially outside of the park, and I'm glad you guys put that in because operations
all of them, all the departments.
Well, that's right. It doesn't just affect there we go. Sorry, I keep missing. Yeah, so that is, I'm gonna put that over here. That's right. It's sometimes operations doesn't just affect your business. There's, especially with the bigger ones, it can affect other places. If there's concerts, if there's music, if there's all these different things. I know that Ontario Place, when we were there in the concerts, they had to end at 11, and because there were so many apartments in and around the area that would complain if they're listening to Metallica at 12:30 at night, echoing up and down the lakeshore. So maintenance, and Britt, I think you're right, all of them. If you were to look at it, all of them are all of them would be involved to some degree. A lot of that would be what Naf and you were talking about here with staffing. So every department would have to make sure that they had enough staff to work that night. So does that mean that people are getting extra hours? Does that mean overtime? And you have to then fit that into the budgetary concerns. So if you think it's going to lead to 3,000 extra people that would come to the park or hang out in the park, what is the per cap? And as Mike was saying earlier, the per cap is how much on average do those 3,000 people spend? And then you have to balance that against what's it going to cost me in staffing. If I'm paying straight time, it's going to cost this much. If I have to pay time and a half, it's going to cost me this much. And at what point, at some point they're saying, okay, well, if our expected case scenario is only going to make us $20,000, maybe we need to rethink how we're going to do this. Because the return on the investment, the return on the ROE, which I think is also yes, it's record of employment, but it's also the return on your effort, because there's a lot of effort that goes into some of these things, has to be there to make it worthwhile. So your ride operators, and Mike, I think it's probably you that put that in. What rides are allowed to run after dark, right? Are there some that probably can't, or different temperatures and that sort of stuff?
Do they serve
Yep.
alcohol at Canada's Wonderland?
They do.
Oh, yeah, they do.
The whole
Oh, okay.
yeah, the whole park is licensed now. You can walk around the whole park with open alcohol, which I thought was wonderful the last time I went, to be honest with you. But,
Yeah, the AGCO changed it was in the last 5 years where they started a program where, I guess, listening to Ontarians and businesses in Ontario about being less restrictive in how they apply, this sort of liquor license formula. Because before it was, if you remember, you had to be like in a designated space so they could serve alcohol, but you couldn't leave the little patio, and there was a sign and all that other stuff. And as they started expanding it out to like movie theaters and other venues, the amusement parks and attractions, got permission, or within the regs are now allowed to serve. And you had to amend your licenses. Like at Wet and Wild, when we started, it was that, patio first. And then when we were talking to the licensing officer at the AGCO, and they said, when we asked them, so, well, we hear that other venues are going to be, open up, and they said, yeah, that's fine, and then amend it. But then your boundaries become the entire facility, minus, you can't bring a beer on a roller coaster yet, or something like that, or public health won't let you swim and have a swim up bar in Ontario like you can in the Caribbean. But the whole site, you could walk around with a beer in your hand and do that kind of stuff. So definitely.
I wonder though how they are managing the smart serve thing. I mean, like, people can share, even if you like that it can be entered into computer where they know how many shots you've got, etc. I mean, still people can share, under minors can get alcohol. I mean, all of these, how they like fix that in such a vast area.
It's difficult. I'd say smart serve only applies, generally at the point of service, right? So you can't overserve, or someone come to the window asking for alcohol has to be, identified. And some parks give out like, wristbands and stuff because people don't generally carry ID. Like a water park, you don't have your driver's license tucked into your bathing suit, right? So you get checked once and then you can go through it. But it doesn't preclude that, you're going to buy alcohol and give it to a minor or something like that. So that's where, your coordination with your in-park security team about enforcing and monitoring those sort of global policies about, so if you have a security personnel in a certain area that they're watching for people that have, indulged in too much alcohol, or have given it to somebody who wouldn't specifically have it. I'd say from my experience with alcohol in the parks, it's usually not the park that's over serving, because the park charges too much. So it's people that arrive to the park or bring in their own alcohol. A lot of parks and attractions have readmission policies, right? So if you leave, you can come back in, and that's kind of a problem because people will go out to their car and chug a
slam back 10 beer and then come back.
10 beer and then come back in the park. But usually, I mean, the premise of food and bev and alcohol service in a park attraction is not to serve to excess too. So it's not a club or a bar. It's more about, it's sort of, serving that, that sort of patio level, consumption, right? Where you're having a beer with lunch, but you're not going to have 6. And the price point's going to be set to that.
And to your, I was gonna say, to your point, Naf, it does that. It talks about that coordinated approach. You've got the one department that is potentially creating a problem, right? With alcohol service, and I don't disagree. Like, the notion of you buy a couple of beer, you're there as a 19-year-old, and you're there with your 17 and 18-year-old friends, and you're buying the beer and then handing them out. So there is a potential to cause some issue and so now there's another whole department, in this case probably the security people, maybe the ride operators. They all have policies or procedures in place to be, if they see this happening, here's the process you need to take. Here's the operations process that needs to take place, and it could, to mitigate it.
There is one thing else. I mean, I think if you scroll down, there will be some stuff down. Sometimes the Padlet do that. Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we
Yeah.
go. And then we've got, I think, finance we touched on earlier when I was talking about trying to make it worthwhile. You got to run the numbers, and the numbers, the finance people, and in most cases they are only looking at the numbers. They're not looking at the service levels and the goodwill and all these other things that an organization looks at. They are looking at the bottom line. So finance is going to say to whoever, each of these different departments, how much does it cost to do a 15-minute fireworks display? Like how much, and so through the finance channels, they're going to go out to procurement, and they're going to go to all the different fireworks companies, and they're going to take the best price. And then it's going to be, well, how much, and we talked about staffing, how much is it going to cost for the staff? How much is it going to cost here? But then every department is, how much do you think we're going to make because we're open for these extra 3 hours? How much food and beverage are we going to make? What's our profit on food and beverage? How much money are we going to make in retail? Is it going to offset all these different costs? And it's all based on hopefully some research, some best practices, and some luck, because you could have the fireworks sitting there and it could end up being a cloudy night, or it could be raining, and suddenly you've already paid for everything, you've paid for the staff, and nobody shows up. So there's always some luck involved, and you have to, when you're doing your finance, you have to plan for a whole year, and there needs to be a little buffer here and there. So I think finance was a good one to put in. IT, and on the digital screen, what were you thinking on digital screen, Susanna? Not sure she can type it in the chat. I do think IT is involved for sure, because there's a whole ton of different things that are going to be extended. The music, the lighting, right? Do we have, and the information boards and all of those sort of things. But I thought that was good customer service. You're right. It is everybody. So now what I'd like us to do is part two. So what operational considerations is each department focused on? So what you can do here is, I think you can add a note, right? So I can add a comment in here. So clearing the park after dark would be a consideration that they would have to take in place. So I'm just going to close mine, and you guys just sort of go around and take a look at that. And we kind of just did that with finance when we were just talking about finance. What are the considerations that finance is going to take into consideration? And really that is the profitability of it. So click back into the link and type away. And then as we see comments popping up, off we go.
Could you please clarify what we are supposed to do? Because I didn't really catch the idea here.
Okay, so what are they? So what's marketing? So what operational considerations does marketing need to put into place? So marketing, they need to understand capacity limits. right? And understand how the admission systems work, so that when and they need to understand what the rules are going to be for the guests, and they need to communicate that out. So it is, hey, we're staying open till 11 o'clock tonight, and we want you to be here. Get your tickets early. There's no additional cost, but all these things are open. They need to message it out there so that they hit their numbers. So they got to tell the story. So that's really one of the things they're going to do. And then they need to figure out, marketing needs to figure out who is most likely to go to the fireworks, like which of their markets is most likely to go, and from where, and then they need to then reach those people at the right time. Let's see. So on food and beverage, what do we have here? Will they still be able to? So they need to figure out, are they going to be able to serve it that much? What inventory levels are they going to have to have? What staffing? Are they going to change what they're going to serve if they're going at night? I don't think we put retail in here. If we put retail up here, I'll just
put it in here.
Oh, you got it? Okay. There it is. So you put retail in here, and then well, you guys are doing other stuff. We'll just keep chatting here. Retail is, are they going to have carts? So at Ontario Place, when we did the fireworks display, we would have just, on a normal operating day, we would have our different stores where they could buy the branded merchandise and all those fun things. On fireworks nights, we had a whole bunch of retail staff who had carts with all sorts of glow in the dark and light up stuff for the kids to wear, or the kids to have. And it was, when we first started, it was cash only, and then they had to figure out how do they get it so they could take debit cards that far away. So there's all these other operating considerations, but they changed the process by which they went and interacted with the guests so that they made more money. And they would blow through a ridiculous amount of merchandise because they were going to the customer. Because once, fireworks is a little bit different than a regular day at the park. People are moving around the park all day long, but boy, oh boy, they have no problem sitting for 4 hours in one spot to have the best seat in the house, right? So now it's about if the guest is acting differently than they normally do, how do you keep engaging them and try to suck as much money out of their wallets as humanly possible?
Yeah, I think in retail too, another example is the retail departments would be looking at would they bring in any type of special merchandise for these programs? So it could be your souvenir type stuff, hats and shirts, but if you've been at fireworks, they have like the glow in the dark and the light up things or whatever, that all those things is something that retail would have to procure and figure out how that they want to sell them in the crowd, right? To get to the people that are sort of there. And that would be something that you wouldn't normally, that they're not normally offering. They're typically not a lot of nighttime merchandising going on because you're not having those programs. But for that, you may have to develop your own special merchandise program for it and look for vendors and stuff. And that may take a large lead too, right? Because you want to have your park logo on it, or you want to have the name of the event or something on that, and that's something you can't turn around in an afternoon, right? That's going to be probably months of work to bring that over, because most of that stuff is made overseas and it has to be shipped and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so and we have HR and staffing here, and what do we have? Are there people available to work? Staff availability, staff training. Yes. Is it different in different places in terms of, is there additional training that needs to take place? Well, yeah, if you're security, it might mean suddenly you're using flashlights when you didn't have to before, when you're clearing the park. You're now looking for people who have snuck off in the dark, to have a drink, or to do other things off of the the paths that you're normally allowed to be on, where normally you would see them and now you don't. Sometimes darkness brings out some stupid ideas. We had people at Ontario Place that would, after dark, would jump into the water to swim across to the amphitheater grounds and try to sneak into concerts by swimming through that disgusting water that was there. But so you have to think of all of those different things. Yeah, digital program design, that's a good one. It's gonna just open some of this. Fireworks safety, exactly. Overall safety that can be caused in a regular day. Yeah, and how does that change at night? Exactly.
You have crowd safety that changes. Where take for example, a fireworks show where normally you have your visitors are spread out throughout the park, and for that show you may get a large amount of people to all congregate in one specific area of the park, or because that's where the viewing area is or something like that. So you're getting into different dynamics of safety in terms of crowd management, about making sure that you have access ways into the crowd. One of the things that at Wonderland we had to ensure were that there were clear paths, because some of the early learnings were that you had a medical incident inside the crowd and that person was inaccessible because you couldn't get to them because everybody was crowded around them. So then you started having to create these sort of right-of-ways through the crowd that had to be marked, and and you had to have ushers or people standing there to make sure no one was there, so that if the person that's sort of right in the heart of the crowd needed something, assistance, or that a fight broke out, or you don't know, medical incident or whatever, that you have that access to it. I think back to, like, when I talk about that kind of subject, look at the Raptors victory parade celebration that went on in downtown Toronto, and that was not well executed because nothing moved, but then there were issues at City Hall about those kinds of things. And I would imagine that if a sports team in Toronto wins a championship again, that the parade will look vastly different than that one, because that one was from an operation standpoint was not a success. I mean, it was a cool event for the city, but they ran a lot of risks during that day because a lot of things happened that they didn't anticipate.
Like 2 million people.
Yes, and not barricading the roads and doing all those things, right? So that they had those issues. But from a crowd control standpoint, how the crowd rate is being handled changes how you have to approach them too. If you've got 50,000 people spread out over 300 acres, that's one thing. If you have all 50,000 in a 5-acre space, then all of a sudden you've got bigger challenges.
Yeah. Accessibility issues for people with bad eyesight. Yep. Or other accessibility issues. Same thing. How to get them in and out. That sort of thing.
Like sometimes you need to build like a viewing platform, right, for people that have accessibility needs, because where you're launching them is a hill, or it's got a grade to it or something like that. And how do you need to be accommodating to everybody that's coming to see this. Yeah.
Exactly. And then here, they're staying open late, purchasing the fireworks. They're running the numbers to make sure it's financially viable. When we talked about this, when we're talking about retail and having that specialty merchandise, would this event look a lot different if management decided in April that they wanted to do it for June, versus if they decided in June to do it the following June? Right. So the answer, I think, is yes. And because the longer the lead time, the more proactive the park can be to deal with or pre-deal with all of the issues they think are going to happen, and take advantage of all of the opportunities that are there. Right. So the food and beverage people might say, you know what, we're going to do these carts, and we're going to, for the same reason the retail people are going to do carts. The carts are successful. What are we going to put on what are we going to put on our carts? And then they can reach out to the other parks or through the association and say, what are the best practices? Who's doing what? What's working well? What's not? And we call it R&D, which is rob and duplicate the best of the best that's happening around the world, and create a new revenue stream during that time period. Versus if the GM says, all right, we're doing fireworks 4 weeks in June, and that's about 3 weeks from now, make it happen. The team will scramble and make it happen, but there won't be, it will be status quo plus fireworks, because there was not the same amount of time to take in full advantage of what's going on. The entertainment. I'm going to see what we have for entertainment here. Why can't I open that? There we go. A band or a DJ or an announcer. Exactly. So you now need to extend or create something brand new, which goes to, that works alongside the fireworks. And the idea of, having music to the fireworks. Well, if you're given a year, you can plan it all out. And you can say, we're going to do this entertainment, and we'll have these different areas, and we're going to move people around those different areas, which is fantastic. Or if you're given 8 weeks, it's, well, we'll just turn the music up like on the PA system, so that at least there's some music that's happening, and the experience would be different. So the planning, the lead time is important, I think. What else do you want to add into this whole thing, Mike?
Looking here, see what we covered off. I think we talked about little things like just like maintenance, for example, where there's so many little considerations. One of the things that happens now is that a lot of systems in these parks are automated. So whether it's your lighting systems, your irrigation systems, your you know where I'm going on that one.
I was in charge that night.
So a lot of these things are on timers, right? And so, and some of it's for energy conservation, right? So that at the end of the day, you're not running every building system, because utilities are expensive, so they shut down. But someone has to adjust the timing of all these things, or make sure that, if you want the pathway lighting to dim at a certain time for the show, then that they're going off and they're coming back on. And I mentioned irrigation because maybe Chuck, you could talk about an example of where that piece of communication was missed.
It certainly was. So for one of these big fireworks displays at Ontario Place, they're done out on a barge on the water, which allows people to. And if you've ever been to Ontario Place, lots of big grassy hills, and the grandstand, all these different places. 10,000 people in the park or so, all getting ready to do the fireworks display, which goes off usually 10:30, closer to 11 almost, right? When the fireworks display goes off. And I am looking at this wall of people up this hill at about 10:30, and all of a sudden I hear a lot of screaming, and I look up the hill, and all of the sprinklers, the underground sprinkler system has come on, and they've come up. Some of them have come up right onto people's butts and turn on with this high pressure water, which is absolutely soaking the entire crowd. And it's not like it's going to be a quick fix, right? Because it's not. I got a radio, because when you're in operations, everyone on the parks need to be able to communicate. I'm like, you've got to get maintenance to turn this off. And it was fast. Like they moved fast to do it, probably 3 or 4 minutes. But in those 3 or 4 minutes, we probably drenched 5,000 people to the point of sitting there shivering. And now you're concerned from a safety perspective. Luckily it was a fairly warm night, but they're still cold. There's a breeze coming off the water. Their blankets are wet. Yeah, it was a
total success.
It was a total success. And I didn't have to deal, I didn't have to deal with the aftermath. And really, the maintenance guys who didn't remember or hadn't been told or just forgot to to readjust the settings on the sprinkler system didn't have to deal with the blowback. It was Mike once again, right? Mike was in charge of operations. Were there
punching bag?
Were there any complaints that night?
Oh, for sure.
So
as you could imagine.
Yeah, and this is one of those times where even with the best laid plans and the whole senior team, including the director of maintenance and grounds and the manager of maintenance and grounds and the marina guy, like every single person is part of the planning meetings, and they were weekly leading up to and then there was a dry run like meeting about here's what's going to happen and here's what we're going to do and all that stuff. So it was, from an operations standpoint, we had everyone knew what their role was, everyone knew what was going to happen, because we had VIP tents, we had catering, we had separate ticketed admissions out on the break wall where we had grandstands set up, so with numbered seats. So we had there was a whole ton of operating procedures and policies that went into place in a coordinated effort to make it all work. And it just took one person to forget one thing to cause chaos. And that's the easiest way to describe the scene was absolute chaos. Funny as all get out to watch the people as people are rolling down the hills. And some people are trying to, one dad's trying to save the rest of his family, and he's standing in front of the sprinkler as it's going around. So he is taking the full brunt of the sprinkler right in his chest and continues to walk around as the water is spraying so that only he's getting wet, which I thought was brilliant, but really, really funny to watch. And he's like, ah! So there's great humor in the things that go wrong after the fact. During during it is not at all funny, and you have to deal with these situations very quickly. So
you can guarantee that the next time we did a fireworks show, that one of the items on the checklist was, did somebody adjust the timing for the irrigation setting?
That's right.
So because it's not like it was the first show ever run at Ontario Place, so it had been done before, but it's just one of those things where sometimes people have mental checklists, and that's where it lets them down, right? Because they didn't write it down to do this this one thing, or you assume that everybody just knows how it goes, and it's just a one detail miss causes the entire event to change its shape. I mean, still had the fireworks, and I'm sure many people enjoyed it, but there was quite a few people that didn't.
But we go back to the notion that everything that we're doing is you do as much proactive as you can that you can think of, and then you also become reactive when the situation presents itself. So in this case, we reacted quickly to the chaos of these sprinklers spraying everyone. And then we became proactive because it became part of the checklist going forward. So it's like, that fool us once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on us, or something, whatever that is. You know what I mean? Like it shouldn't happen again. Something else will happen. But something's always going to happen. But once it happens once, you need to put it into into those procedures going forward. And I think let's put up the emergency plan. Yeah, fire brigade, ambulance. Yep. What did we put in? We did marketing, right? Yeah, how to communicate the new program, timing, special.
Yeah, there's no point in putting on the fireworks show of that cost if you're not telling people about it, right? So big pressure on the marketing and sales department to deliver right on that, because they'll have projections of how many people that they think they could bring in for this event, but they have to execute their own communications plan, because if nobody knows about it, then you're just launching fireworks off into the air with the staff.
With no benefit. The whole idea is that if fireworks somewhere through research, and this is where research is important, through research, best practices, all this sort of stuff, someone has determined that you are going to get enough of a lift, enough of a boost in your attendance to make this worthwhile. And you know, you could use, a lot of people would have used Ontario Place as a prime example, right? The Ontario Place fireworks displays used to, you know, on a regular day in the park, if we had 5,000 people, that'll be a huge day. And on fireworks nights, we're at 15 to 20,000, and they're all paying. So each fireworks display paid for itself. So anyway, so that's, you know, you guys you're doing a great job of starting to look at it as an all of business approach to how do you make a successful attraction. And really the operations are the stepping stones of little pieces of policy and process and all these sort of things connected to each other, talking back and forth to make sure that it's executed in a profitable and a safe, profitable, customer-focused manner. Going right back to our, to our definition that we had in there. And at 10:42, unless you guys have any other questions or comments or anything like that, why don't we end it there? Oh no, let's go back. We'll talk about what we're going to do next week. Let me stop sharing that. See if I can reshare the other one. Where is that? There it is. Okay, so next week, we're going to talk about interdepartmental communications, the operations role in the overall success of an attraction, and intro to policies and procedures. I guess it would be an expansion. I should change that to expansion of policies and procedures, because we've started to talk about it today, about the importance of having what you want to see written down so that everyone can do it. So anyway, guys, thank you very much for sticking with us. And that's about it for this week. Are you, Brittany, Knopf, you have any questions, or are you good? All right, I'm assuming you're good. So with that, we're going to hang up and post this up. And once again, if you have any questions during the week, let us know. Thank you so much. We will talk to you guys later. Bye.